guys, gals, and non-binary pals, GM Potter here, and today we'll be going over One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kessley, which came out in 1962. I read this one back when I was in high school. I want to say I was in between my junior and senior years of high school. I read it over the summer, not because it was required, just because it came up on a list of top adaptations or something that I was watching. And, oh, the cat's coming out of the window in the corner here, so sorry for the light levels. You can see him. It came out as one of the top 10 adaptations, and I figured why not read it? I like books, I like movies, so let's get into it. So the book is narrated by Chief Bromden, who is a half Native American, half white character. He's essentially been institutionalized since World War II. His father was humiliated by the U.S. government as well as by his white mother, and it caused essentially a depressive episode leading to a break with reality and schizophrenia, is how the book presents it. That's not how these things always happen, that's not how these things always present themselves, but this is, in the context of the book, this is what happened. He focuses his narration mainly on another patient named McMurphy, who faked an insanity plea to get off of a battery gambling charge. He was also accused of statutory naughties. The girl wasn't willing to testify, so he got away with that one. He's seen as a con man. He's wild and free and non-conforming and all this, that, and the other, which pisses off Nurse Ratched, who is referred to several times as Big Nurse. She's seen as kind of the fascist influence. She's very overbearing. She is control incarnate. She's Big Brother in this universe. There's a doctor on staff on the ward that is the only one left. There were other doctors that they all quit or moved or got fired because of her influence. She's that powerful. She uses her voice as a form of authoritarianism to control, to belittle, to keep insurrection down, essentially. And McMurphy challenges this. McMurphy, at every step that it's possible to come up against her, comes up against her, and decides at every step that he's going to fight the good fight and come up against her. And while she is a horrible character, she is definitely the bad guy. I also don't think he's right in his just blind rebellion, that it doesn't matter what she does. There are very few good decisions. In fact, I'm struggling to remember any right now that she makes. But at the same time, she's in charge of the ward. And the things she does, they may or may not see, are there in part for their safety. Yes, she gets off on control. Yes, she's a bad person. But it's also in part to their safety that they need to do these things, and they need to follow her control. Which, having had 2 grippy sock vacations, I can tell you right now that you get out much faster if you comply. Like, if you do what you're supposed to, if you go to session, if you participate in group, if you do all the things that you're supposed to do, they let you out. And it's not the big scary bad thing that everyone makes it out to be. It's a hospital, and they're there to help you. Yes, there have been people in both of my grippy sock vacations that were there to get off on control, to be domineering, but that wasn't the takeaway that I chose to have. Anyway, enough about that. So, McMurphy riles up Nurse Ratched. She puts him and Chief in electroshock therapy as a punishment. She's very clearly abusing her power in response to him. Whereas she wouldn't, reading this through the eye of someone who's been through it, in at least the modern age, because I haven't been in an institution, I've been in a hospital. There is a difference. Reading it through a modern lens is a little different, and I've read up and I've studied institutions like this one, and they seem to be places where people who craved control went to get control over other people. that it was very definitely a way to exercise control and authoritarianism and to be a bad guy in real life. Whereas the hospitals I've been at, I've been to one very good one and one very, very bad one. There was still an air of wanting to help. So I realize I'm not reading this with the right historical lens, and I don't think I can read this with the right historical lens because my own experiences prevent me from it. The first time I read this book back in high school, I hadn't had a grippy sock vacation. That happened the first time when I was in college, and the second time a couple years ago. Even then, like, there was an air of, well, you've got to follow the rules. And maybe that's my upbringing. I had not a strict upbringing, but not a not strict upbringing. It was very much you follow the rules, and like if you follow the rules, then good things happen. One of the main themes of this book is institutional control versus human dignity and human worth. That it's putting these two things against each other that I don't think it happens that way anymore. That 100% that's how it used to happen. I've read Girl Interrupted by Joanna Kaysen, and she had a similar experience to what is detailed in this book. It's a little different in some ways, but the authoritarianism and the you've got to tell secrets to earn your way out kind of thing kind of tracks with this. And things that I've read, journals and other memoirs of people who've been institutionalized in this time frame, it all kind of tracks that it was 100% a place of, to paraphrase Matilda, I'm big, you're little, I'm right, you're wrong, and there's nothing you can do about it. Which is kind of funny that that's the quote that comes to mind, because in the movie, you've got Danny DeVito as one of the characters, and Danny DeVito starred in and directed Matilda, so kind of fun. Sanity versus insanity, doing what comes naturally versus doing what is expected of you, and doing what society expects you to do and what society asks you to do, and the idea that anything outside of that very narrow bit of control is insane. That it's implied that, okay, I'm trying not to get into spoilers. So the narrator, Chief, he presents as deaf and mute, but he's not. He just pretends to be that way because they hassle him less, and they don't give him as much crap, basically, as long as he pretends to be impassive. And it deals a lot with shame. I found this book to be incredibly misogynistic. Just incredibly misogynistic. Women are the root of all bad things. He's here in part because of the women in his life. The one that he tried to statutory bad things to, and the one that he tried to, and the result of battery, and his drinking and his gambling are the results of a neglectful mother. And there's a storyline with prostitutes towards the end of the book, and it's the prostitutes' fault, and he's always trying to get prostitutes and trying to get the men to... Billy Bibbit is, Danny DeVito in the movie's character, is very childlike and very repressed in his nature, and he's terrified of his mother, and his mother is the bad guy, and you have Nurse Ratched, who's the bad guy, and you have the Japanese nurse, who's the bad guy, and you have all of, with the exception of one character who's barely in the book, every female character is a bad guy. Every female character, regardless, is a bad guy, or is at least blamed for the bad things that happen when they're introduced. Like, the prostitutes are blamed for the misbehaving of the men. And it's like, they didn't really do anything other than what they were paid to do. Sex work is real work. Like, they did their job. And I read it twice, once when I was in high school and then again recently. I don't know if it was reading it from a young lens or what, that I just didn't pick up on all the misogyny. Like, I picked up on some of it because it's very explicit and very overt misogynistic tones, and it's misogynistic in the way the word was introduced to me in high school, by my European history teacher, who described it as being the sexual fear of women. That's 100% how they approach this, that it's women are, because of women's sexuality, because of women's nurturing nature, because of women's mothering nature, because of all of the things that can societally make a woman, they're afraid and angry at them. And it's just, it's a little much. It's a little much. I wouldn't ban it. I would say, should you read this? It's worth one read. It's a very interesting story. It's a little brutal in places because it doesn't shy away from all of the horrible things. There's lobotomies, there's electroshock, there's beatings, there's suicide. That's mentioned in the book. That it's a rough book, but if you're strong enough to get through that, I highly recommend reading it at least once, just so you can get the references, because it is very much referenced in our culture, in American and in Western culture. That there's so many references to the book, and then watch the movie afterwards, because the movie is really well done. Jack Nicholson does a phenomenal job. Watch the movie, read the book, and see what you think about it. In terms of it being it is one of the most challenged and banned novels, but it's also been called one of the best loved novels by the BBC, and it was called one of Time Magazine's 100 best English language novels written between 1923 and 2005, which is pretty high praise in both of those cases. Some highlights. It was banned in 1974 in Strongsville, Ohio, for being pornographic, for glamorizing criminal activity, and for having a tendency to corrupt juveniles, and contains depictions of bestiality, bizarre violence, torture, dismemberment, death, and human elimination, which I think they mean poop. I think they're trying to say poop, because you already said death. Like, if they meant murder, I think they would have said, I think they're trying to say poop. That it talks about poop. Which, I don't know if you know this, Ohio, but everybody poops. Sometimes it comes up in novels as a plot point. Especially in institutions where people were known to be sitting in their own filth. It's gonna come up. In 2000, Yorba Linda, California challenged it, and the parents who challenged it actually called it garbage. They said that the teachers could be picking the best books, but they keep picking this garbage. And I'm like, that's such a juvenile way. Like, you didn't have anything specific. Like, you're trying to challenge the book. You're trying to keep it from being taught or even allowed in the school. And the best you can come up with is garbage? That's it? Like, it's a rough book. I'll give you that. And I don't know if it should be taught at the high school level. It's definitely one that you could read in college, because there's a lot to go into it, and you have to read it with a historical lens. Like, that's just how this book is. We're so far removed in it in this 2022 as of filming this, that we're so far removed from this style of institution, from this style of violence and degradation in terms of treatment, quote unquote treatment, that you have to read it, I think, either and have a medical history book next to you, or read it in a classroom setting to understand what they're talking about in a lot of the cases. That it's worth reading if you can get through it. I'm not saying this is a book everybody has to read. I don't say that about many books. Mansfield Park, everybody should read that. It's phenomenal. But if you have the stomach for it, this, I think, repays reading once. Doesn't necessarily repay rereading. I picked up on some things that I didn't, but that was probably because of the age I first read it versus the age I read it again. So, yeah, should you read this? Sure, definitely go for it. Should it be banned? No, 100% not. It's not a children's book, but that doesn't mean that younger audiences can't appreciate the writing style and the syntax, and if they're mature enough, the general story. So, have you read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or did you watch the movie? Where do you stand on banned books? Do you think books should be banned? Or do you, like me, agree that books don't have to be taught, but they should definitely not be banned? Because that just makes them more interesting to the people you're trying to keep them from. Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!